Are you with a narcissist or slowly losing your sense of reality? If you're asking yourself this question, then something in the relationship already feels off. When people are trying to make sense of difficulties in a relationship, one of the most common questions that arises is, am I with a narcissist? This is not always an easy question to answer. In fact, part of what makes that so confusing is that narcissistic traits are often not immediately obvious, especially in the early stages of a relationship. So, my name's Rick Cardwell. I'm a psychodynamic therapist and I deal a lot with relationships, couples counselling, and have a lot of experience with narcissistic behaviours and narcissistic relationships. So, in today's video, I want to walk you through some of the key behavioural patterns that are often associated with narcissistic dynamics in relationships. And more importantly, help you understand why this can feel so confusing from the inside. So before we begin, it's important to say this very clearly. We are talking about patterns of behaviours and traits. We are not using this as a label to diagnose someone in your life. Real people are very complex and many behaviours exist on a spectrum. So why can it be so hard to recognise? It's often easier to recognise certain difficulties in relationships. For example, if someone has a visible struggle with alcohol, the impact tends to be more immediately identifiable. If a partner is experiencing severe depression, you'll usually become aware of that quite early on as it affects mood, energy, and day-to-day functioning in very clear ways. But narcissistic patterns are different. In many cases, the early presentation can be very engaging. A person can be charismatic, confident, socially skilled, and highly attentive in the beginning. You might feel chosen, valued, or even special. There can be a strong sense of connection or intensity that feels very exciting. In some relationships where more vulnerable narcissistic traits are present, the dynamic may look slightly different. A partner may seem emotionally fragile, and you may find yourself stepping into a caregiving or a stabilising role, feeling needed or responsible for their emotional well-being. And this is where the complexity begins. The relationship can feel meaningful at first, even deeply bonding, making it harder to recognise later when something starts to feel emotionally off balance. So, the key patterns that you should be aware of. So, let's explore some of the behavioural patterns that can show up in narcissistic dynamics. Again, these are patterns and not definitive labels. Most people find criticism uncomfortable. That's very human. But generally, when feedback is fair and delivered reasonably, we can reflect on it, regulate ourselves, and even learn from it. In narcissistic patterns, criticism is often experienced very differently. Even mild feedback can be felt as a threat to the self-image, leading to defensiveness, anger, withdrawal, or blame shifting. Over time, you may notice yourself adjusting your behaviour, not because you want to, but because it feels safer. You might start monitoring what you say, how you say it, and when you say it. This is often described as feeling like you are walking on eggshells. And that emotional monitoring can become exhausting. Another common pattern is an ongoing belief that they are the most knowledgeable person in the room, regardless of the topic. This doesn't necessarily mean overt arrogance all the time. It can be subtle. It might sound like dismissing your opinion, correcting you frequently, or reframing conversations so that their perspective becomes the final word. Over time, this can lead to a quiet erosion of your confidence in your own judgment. You may begin to think it's easier not to say anything, or there's no point, it will just turn into a debate that I can't win. This dynamic can reduce emotional equality in the relationship, even if it isn't immediately obvious. Now, in more unhealthy relational dynamics, communication is not always direct. Instead of expressing needs clearly, a person may use indirect strategies such as guilt, withdrawal, passive aggression, or emotional pressure to influence outcomes. This can be especially confusing because it may not be immediately visible as manipulation. It can feel like misunderstanding, emotional intensity, or ongoing conflict that can't quite resolve. Over time, this can leave you questioning your own perception of events. Now, another pattern that can appear is jealousy, particularly around your independence. So, this may include discomfort with your friendships, hobbies, achievements, or any situation where your attention is directed elsewhere. In some cases, partners may view others in their life as extensions of themselves rather than as separate individuals with their own needs and autonomy. You may begin to notice subtle discouragement from spending time with others or emotional reactions when you engage in activities that don't involve them. In these dynamics, the emotional focus often becomes one-sided. One partner's needs and preferences and emotions take priority, while the other partner gradually becomes more accommodating, more flexible, and more self-sacrificing. At first, this can feel like love, loyalty, or commitment, but over time, it can lead to emotional depletion, where your own needs are constantly postponed or minimised. A key sign here is not just the needs are different, but that one person's needs consistently shape the relationship. Let me give you an example to illustrate how this can look in real life. A client I once worked with and described a relationship. She described a relationship where even small disagreements became emotionally charged. If she mentioned feeling hurt by something a partner said, the conversation would quickly shift. Instead of exploring her feelings, the focus would move on to, oh, well, you're just too sensitive, or you misunderstand everything. Now, over time, she stopped bringing things up altogether, not because the issues disappeared, but because every attempt to communicate led to stress, defensiveness, or even escalation. She described it as, I started to edit myself before I even spoke. Now, this is a common pattern in relationships where emotional safety becomes inconsistent. In another situation, a person began a relationship where their partner initially seemed deeply interested in their life, very supportive, attentive, and even admiring. However, as the relationship progressed, subtle changes emerged. Spending time with friends was met with disappointment. Career achievements were downplayed or redirected back to the partner's needs. And even hobbies that were once enjoyed independently began to feel like points of tension. Eventually, that person realised they had unintentional unintentionally reorganized their entire life around the emotional reactions of their partner. They said, I didn't notice it happening. I just slowly stopped doing things that made me feel like me. And this gradual shift is important. It rarely happens all at once, which is part of why it can be so difficult to recognize. One of the most significant signs that something may be happening in this kind of relational dynamic is confusion. Not clarity, not certainty, but confusion. You may find yourself constantly questioning, am I overreacting? Is it me? Why do things feel so unstable? Why does this keep happening? This confusion is not a personal weakness. It is often a reflection of inconsistent emotional communication within the relationship itself. When someone's behaviour shifts between charm, withdrawal, criticism or control, it becomes difficult for the nervous system to settle into a stable understanding of what is happening. So, if you recognise yourself in some of what I've described today, it's important not to rush to label or to rush to conclusions. Instead, focus on patterns. How do you feel over time in the relationship? Do you feel emotionally safe to express yourself? Are your needs acknowledged consistently or only conditionally? Are you becoming more or less like yourself over time? These questions, they're often more useful than any single label. And if you are feeling confused, that in itself is something worth paying attention to, not as a diagnosis, but as information. In healthy relationships, there is room for two people to exist fully, for needs to be discussed, differences to be tolerated, and individuality to be maintained. When that balance is missing, the emotional experience often tells the story long before the label ever does. So thank you for watching, and remember to reflect on what feels right for you. If you've got something from this video, if it's resonating with you, then and you have any questions, please feel free to message me on any of my social media outlets. I'll always get back to you. And please like or share, subscribe to this video in the hope that other people can find it useful and it helps other people get their life in order as well. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back with another video.